So I think next we will transition to our final presentation in this section. It's on climate change adaptation by the Center for Indigenous Environmental Resources here, facilitating action to address climate change adaptation needs in indigenous North America. And please forgive me if I mispronounce the name, but Meryl Ann Farr and Lisa Hardes from SEER will be making the presentation.
Thank you very much. There we go. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for inviting us here today to share information about SEER's project, Facilitating Action to Address Climate Change Adaptation Needs in Indigenous North America, which is funded by the CEC NPECA program. Thank you to the CEC and to the public here watching and on the webcast for being interested in this project. The Center for Indigenous Environmental Resources, SEER, is leading this exciting project, which is still in its early stages. It is a one-year project. SEER has been working on climate change research and adaptation planning with First Nations in Canada for the past decade. SEER is a First Nation-directed charitable organization located in Winnipeg, Manitoba, and works across Canada. Meryl Ann Farr, SEER's executive director, is a past JPAC member, so some of you may recognize her. My name is Lisa Hardes. I'm a planner, and I'm managing this project for SEER. SEER's NPECA project is focused on climate change adaptation planning in Indigenous communities, meaning tribes here in the U.S. and First Nation, Métis, and Inuit communities in Canada. A first step in this planning process is to understand what climate changes are occurring in Indigenous country and what it means to community vulnerabilities and long-term sustainability. We know that climate change will have adverse impacts on all communities. Indigenous communities are particularly vulnerable to these changes, given their relationships with lands and waters, their dependence on natural resources, and their tendency to live in a more vulnerable state due to historic marginalization. Overall, Indigenous communities in North America have poor health, lower education rates, experience higher levels of poverty, and live with poor and less developed infrastructure than non-Indigenous communities. Efforts to develop innovative approaches to economic development that create jobs and align with Indigenous worldviews of development and stewardship are limited by legal land and water rights challenges, lack of capital investment opportunities, lack of true partnership opportunities, and lack of capacity within Indigenous communities. This tends to keep communities in relative poverty, accepting development agreements that may not be in their best interest or missing out completely. These socioeconomic issues contribute to the overall lack of resilience to change, including climate change, in Indigenous North America. For over a decade, the Indigenous communities SEER has worked with have been talking with us about changes to weather patterns, to animal behaviors, to plants, to lake and river ice cover, to the many changes they have seen and experienced as a result of climate change. They've seen these changes affect their built infrastructure, their transportation, winter access to their community for food and fuel supplies, local travel for hunting and trapping, access to traditional foods and medicines, and their ability to practice and teach their children their traditions, their language, and culture. A fire wiped out a blueberry patch in a northern Saskatchewan First Nation we were working with, outside of the regular firefighting season, when many of the communities have contracts with local municipalities for fire support. While initially to an outsider this may seem minor to lose a blueberry patch, it had significant impact on the community's overall resilience. People lost their source of berries, but also, and here's the unexpected part then from what we would normally think, their ability to teach their children Cree words and practices while out in the bush, to spend time together as a family, and to bake and can berries, so cultural, social, and economic impacts. With the climate change impacts in the boreal prairie provinces, these types of fire events are becoming more the norm than the exception. Global climate models predict increases in fires from between 70 to 120% in the prairie regions of Canada. To address these changes and their impacts, Indigenous groups will require strong efforts to plan for and adapt to projected climate changes. And yet, to date, adaptation planning in Indigenous communities has largely not occurred. Adaptation planning itself is a relatively new type of planning, and many cities and towns are also just beginning this process. For Indigenous communities who are relying largely on government funding to engage in adaptation planning, the opportunities have been limited by relatively low funding amounts coupled by high need. The topic of adaptation raises complicated issues for people, and in workshops we have participated in the past, people have talked about how Indigenous communities have adapted with the environment since time immemorial and will continue to adapt. And yet, previously, adaptation was not limited to small, often poor tracts of land and by jurisdictional and legal issues, as they are today. Changes are happening so fast now that adaptation as has happened in the past is not possible or enough. And these changes are impacting Indigenous knowledge and requiring an even more diligent effort to continue building and sharing this with the young generations and to connect with other Indigenous communities and knowledge holders to share expertise. As climate change continues to impact Indigenous communities, understanding current and predicted impacts and their effect on community vulnerability, and to understand community adaptive capacity to plan for the future is critical to long-term success. Indigenous groups in North America have different ecosystems and cultural realities. Their climate change experiences will be different. So to create a common topic for people to discuss for their adaptation planning work during the project forum, we decided to focus on an impact that all communities are experiencing, whether their issue is sea level rise, flooding, drought, melting, or heat alerts, and that has impacted traditional foods, plants, and medicines. The highlights of this project are planning and delivery of a climate change adaptation forum, which is open to Indigenous communities and people working on climate change, adaptation, and food security issues. It's happening this September. The project is funded by the NPECA program of the CEC. Indigenous communities have said that they want to come together to learn from each other. This directed us in creating the forum. We're creating a space for knowledge transfer and communities of practice where people working on the same issues connect, teach, and learn from each other. There are two main project goals: to build capacity of tribal and Indigenous groups, to build resilience in their communities to climate change, and to transfer the knowledge gained and lessons learned to workshops to other communities across North America. We've created an invitation and application process to select 25 people working on climate change adaptation in their communities or with Indigenous communities. The deadline is next Monday. Many of you we spoke to at the booth outside. The application is there and online. We urge you to apply if you're interested in attending. We have three primary outcomes for the forum. After our time together, participants will have created draft implementation plans that outline key issues, priority areas, and next steps that focus on food and medicine security. To facilitate this, we're developing a workbook for people to use in small groups. We plan to create groups so that people working with similar climate change impacts can work together, and so that people who are newer to the topic will be working closely with people who have worked on it for some time. We believe this will result in the second key outcome, which is clear implementation next steps and a tool for people to move forward on adaptation planning when they go home. Finally, through this process, people will identify areas where needs and actions can be linked to other plans and priorities for added value and sharing of resources. In addition, the forum will provide opportunities to create new and strengthened networks and communities of practice for ongoing knowledge sharing. So, for example, we're creating workshop outlines and tools for others to host similar Indigenous adaptation events in the future. We are committed to knowledge transfer and are still planning the most innovative ways to share this information so that it has impact in life beyond our project. The forum is being hosted by the Mohawk community of Akwesasne, whose territory is in both Canada and the U.S. Climate change and adaptation solutions require that we think regionally and outside of our jurisdictional boxes, and we thought this location would remind participants very vividly of this need. Here's a map of Akwesasne, and we'll be meeting in the village of St. Regis, which is in the green area in the middle. The brown is New York State. The light pink and purple on your right is the province of Quebec, and light pink and yellow on your left is the province of Ontario. At the forum, we will have actual presentations of community adaptation, time to complete actual parts of plans, traditional knowledge from elders, and because we're committed to building communities of practice, we're creating targeted networking spaces in a speaker's corner. The project has several partners. In Canada, 3 federal government departments are on our working group: Environment Canada, Health Canada, and Aboriginal Affairs and Northern Development Canada. In the U.S., the Environmental Protection Agency has been our key contact and participates regularly in our working group. Other partners for the initiative are NASA, the Adaptation Partnership, the American Indian Alaskan Native Climate Change Working Group, the U.S. Department of the Interior, the U.S. Geological Society, the U.S. Forest Service, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Indigenous communities we have worked with have described resilience this way: that which bends but does not break. This project is helping communities get there because crisis that is brought by climate change eliminates options. If you have limited capacity and no plans, adversity can cause crisis. Planning is about creating options, having strategies during crisis, and coming through it with strength and confidence. We're busy preparing for the September gathering and are looking forward to an exciting and productive event that gets communities closer to developing tools that will help them build their resilience to climate change. Thank you very much for your time and attention today. Please feel free to email us for more information.
Thank you so much. Very timely topic and very important issue of resilience and adaptation, often overlooked in the climate change discussion. It's heartening to see the emphasis. I think we're all going to be looking forward to hearing the results of the workshop and sharing that knowledge and helping you to build the sharing of knowledge as it happens. I'm going to turn first to Secretary Elvira for any comments or thoughts.
Yo creo que el tiempo que le han dedicado a preparar este magnífico taller va a encontrar mucho eco con la otra parte del taller que hizo el Consejo Consultivo, el JPAC, para ir preparando información no solamente a las comunidades, sino a los pueblos, a las zonas rurales, a los países y también hacia el mundo. Creo que esta parte de considerar conocer nuestra capacidad de resiliencia, nadie la conocemos, es algo nuevo totalmente para el mundo, como lo fue el cambio climático en los años 90 y estamos apenas preparándonos. Yo creo que el trabajo de ustedes va a ser de mucha utilidad a nivel regional, pero también a nivel mundial, para saber hacia dónde caminar. El único comentario es que el comentario final es que a veces se nos olvidan cosas cruciales en la vida. En las negociaciones de cambio climático, nunca el mundo pensó que el primer impacto y el más fuerte iba a ser el agua, el exceso de agua en inundaciones o la falta de agua en las sequías. Y eso es lo que está ahorita impactando al mundo. Yo creo que esta línea de resiliencia que ustedes están desarrollando nos va a dar elementos para literalmente tener la clave de la sobrevivencia del ser humano. Felicidades.
Thank you very much and congratulations for your work.
Thank you. Well, thank you for your presentation and for the explanation of the pilot project, which I'm sure is going to prove to be very beneficial. Certainly, climate change for many First Nations communities, not only in Canada but across North America, climate change is just the latest challenge to the resilience of communities, whether clean water issues, housing, education issues. in some cases, leadership issues in particular band situations. But I think certainly the three governments represented in CEC and beyond CEC with the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change through Fast Start financing at post-Copenhagen, we're increasingly, as Secretary Elvira said, increasingly moving our focus to balance mitigation efforts to adaptation. And certainly in Canada, from the 49th parallel to the 60th and north, we're dedicating more and more funding specifically to adaptation, not just in First Nations communities, but particularly in those communities in trying to prepare them for the evolving impact of climate change, which there is good reason to be concerned are going to be much greater than we've seen to date. So it is an area, it is a part of a dimension of climate change which the broader citizenry doesn't always think about, but certainly it has our attention, and projects like yours are going to help in delivering that to focus more attention and resources. Financial resources are important, but I think some of the lessons to be learned are also in better practices, in applied technologies, and in leadership. So thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I have a couple of questions that have come in, one for Minister Kent and the other for Secretary Juan Elvira. First to Minister Kent. This is somewhat broader with respect to the issue of resilient communities in a broader sense. And the question comes to us from Jennifer DeRose in Canada. And her question is, what opportunities can the government provide for communities to be more resilient and sustainable? More specifically, what kind of financial support or incentives may be available within your domain?
Oh, it's a very good question. It is a huge topic, and we discussed it earlier today in terms of challenges for northern communities and isolated communities, First Nations and non-First Nations communities, with regards to the vast amounts of diesel fuel which we transport to the north every year for electricity generation. And we heard some wonderful examples today of where the application of things like motion sensors in houses, in not operating these generators 24/7, in basically applying better practices, let alone pollution control on the exhaust fumes from these stationary generators, which pollute so significantly with black carbon, with soot, basically. But I think what we have to do is and we're seeing the permafrost, we're seeing our infrastructure, rail, roads, airports in the north being significantly affected by the thaw, by the fact that permafrost is not either holding up houses which are already on stilts, but or roads. We're seeing the ice roads are not functional as many months of the year as they used to be, and that's already causing significant supply problems to the north. It impacts on delivery of food, affordable food. It impacts on right across the resiliency, the ability of communities to be flexible, to respond, to be resilient. So it is a huge challenge, and it's one that we need to be focused on at both the federal level, at the provincial and territorial level, and at the community level, communities large and small.
Thank you. And specifically, and perhaps on a more general basis, speaking of climate change, the question for Secretary Elvira, ¿cuáles son las políticas públicas específicas y realmente implementadas por implementar que impacten en la adaptación y mitigación del cambio climático que ocurre en nuestro país?
Okay. Bueno, creo que en estos 5 años y medio de gobierno, México dio a conocer a los mexicanos la primera estrategia de cómo luchar contra el cambio
fight
climático.
against the
A
climate
manera
change.
de anécdota, les puedo
And
decir que
I could say
los primeros 10 días de
that
mi
the
trabajo
first
fui
days
a la
of my
oficina del presidente
administration, I
Calderón
went to the office
y
of
le dije, presidente,
Mr.
necesito hablar
Calderon, and I
contigo.
said,
Dice, pues si acabamos de
Mr.
entrar,
President, I need to
tienes
talk
que
to you.
conocer la
And
secretaría.
he said, well, no, we
Le
just started.
comenté,
And I
tenemos un
said, well,
grave
you know what,
problema
we
en
have a
México
very big
que
problem
se
here in
llama cambio
Mexico, which is
climático.
called
Y el
climate change.
70% de
And
los mexicanos
70% of
no
all
saben qué
Mexicans
es
does not
ni qué impactos
know
va a tener.
what
Y
is,
de ahí
what is
empezamos
this?
a hablar de
And
cambio
we
climático
can
en
be
México
talking
de
about
manera muy
climate change
intensa.
in a very
Después de presentar la
intense way,
estrategia en
but
el
after
año
presenting my
2007,
strategy in
se
2007,
hizo un programa
we had
especial
a
de cambio
specific
climático
program of
en
climate
donde
change
todo el
where
gobierno, bueno,
everybody
la mitad del
in the
gabinete
cabinet
trabajó en cómo
were working
empezar a
in
reducir
how to
emisiones,
reduce
cómo hacer la
emissions,
mitigación de
how we
emisiones
can mitigate
en la
those
generación de,
emissions, to
de
generate, for
energía
example,
eléctrica,
power,
en la perforación de pozos de petróleos
drilling, oil
mexicanos,
drilling,
en transporte sustentable,
sustainable
en conservación de
transportation,
bosques,
and trying to
en
preserve
reforestación,
woods, and to,
en turismo sustentable.
sustainable
Cerca de 8
tourism,
de 17 secretarías
and
entregamos un
15
plan
of 18
al presidente
secretariats we
para
deliver a
reducir
plan
cerca
to the
del
president in order to
7%
reduce
de las
in a
emisiones que
7%
tenía el
of all the
gobierno
emissions
federal.
that the federal
A ese
government was trying to
7%
reduce. Out
estamos
of the
sumando un
7%,
3%
we are
más
adding a
que la
3%
iniciativa
more
privada
than the private
que las
initiative,
compañías
and that
privadas
the private
han
companies
decidido
have
hacer
decided to,
por voluntad propia, reducción
to
del uso de
reduce
agua,
the use of
reducción de
water
emisiones, reducción de
and
basura,
emissions,
y estamos llegando
garbage.
en bases voluntarias
They did this
como país en
voluntarily, and we
desarrollo
are doing
del
this
10%.
at a
Estas son las
10%.
primeras políticas
These are the
públicas
first
que ahora toman
policies
forma
that they take
con la
shape
Ley
now
General de
with
Cambio
the
Climático.
general law of
México es el
climate change.
primer
Mexico
país, de hecho,
would be the
en
first
el mundo en
country
desarrollo
in the
que tiene
developing
una ley
world
de cambio
who has
climático,
a
en
climate
donde
change act,
ponemos el
and
orden
where we
para que el
place the
gobierno
order
federal
so that
trabaje,
the federal
el gobierno
government
de las
works and
provincias
the
o de los
governments of
estados,
the little
los
provinces and
gobiernos
states
municipales,
and the
pero también se sume
municipalities.
la
They can be
iniciativa
added
privada
to
o
the
los
private
empresarios.
initiative and the
Y al mismo
entrepreneurs,
tiempo
and at the same
se
time
genera
we
un
can be
fondo de
generating another
financiamiento
fund
para el crecimiento
for
verde, que
the
esta es una idea
green
totalmente nueva en
buildings or the
nuestro
green
país.
greener
Un
growth,
fondo de
and this is a
transición
fund for
para
the
cambiar las
transition in
formas
order
de
to
usar la
change the
energía
ways
y la
that we
economía,
used to use the
y finalmente
power
establece
and the
metas
economy, and to
al año
establish new goals
2020,
towards
2030 y
2020,
2050 de
2013,
cómo ir reduciendo
and 30,
nuestras
so that we can
emisiones.
reduce
Entonces
our
creo que
levels
con
of
estas
emissions. So I
políticas
believe that with
públicas
these public
estamos
policies we
trabajando
will be
muy
able to
fuertemente
work very
en
closely, and at the same
hacer
time
la
we will be
mitigación,
able
la
to
reducción de
mitigate and to
emisiones.
reduce
Y en materia de
emissions, and in
adaptación,
terms of adaptation,
estamos por
we will
dar a
be
conocer un programa
about
nacional
to
de
let everybody
adaptación,
know about this
como por ejemplo
national
ciudades como
adaptation
Cuernavaca,
plan.
que están muy cerca de
Countries like
México,
Cuernavaca, for
o la
example,
Ciudad de
cities like
México,
Cuernavaca,
está
that are very
llegando
close to Mexico
el
City.
mosquito
We
que
get the
provoca la enfermedad
mosquito
del
that,
dengue. Esas
that,
enfermedades nunca
provokes,
existieron en
dengue.
estas
And
ciudades
these are some
y
of
sin
the
embargo
diseases
ya
that we've
están
never had in
existiendo
these cities,
por
but
efecto
now
del
we
cambio
have them
climático.
because of the climate change.
Áreas
Areas
de
like,
este
for
año
example,
2012 estamos
in
llegando
2012,
a
we
más
are
de 1
getting
millón de
to more than
hectáreas
1 million
que
of
fueron
hectares who
agrícolas,
were
que fueron
used to be
ganaderas
for
y que por falta de
agriculture,
agua
and
ya
due
no
to the lack of
producen ni
water, they're not
agricultura ni
producing
tampoco
anything,
ganadería.
nor
¿Cómo las
food
estamos cambiando a su
or
vocación
animals. So
original
how can we
de
change
crecimiento
this
de vida silvestre
to,
para
in order
devolverle
to be
la
able to
economía
get
a la
this
gente del
back,
lugar?
that is the
Entonces,
economy
todas
for the
estas
people
políticas
that they used to
públicas
work in
creo
this area.
que
So
están
these public policies
inscritas
that
en
are
una gran
part
mayoría
of these
en esta ley de
projects
cambio
and this new,
climático que
act
confiamos
of climate
sea,
change, that
como
we
me han
are
dicho ministros de
confident, as
Centroamérica,
many ministers of
oye,
Central
queremos
America
copiar tu
have
ley
told me,
para
we want to
ponerla en
copy
nuestro
your
país.
law so that we
Adelante,
can
si
put it in
podemos
our
hacer
country.
este trabajo
Well, go ahead.
regional,
If we can do
nos
this
va a
at a
servir
regional
mucho a
level,
todos.
it's going to be much more helpful.
I have, sorry, I do have one other here. Sorry. Hello? Can you hear me? Yes? Okay, thank you. A question on Twitter from the New Brunswick Climate Change Hub. The question is to all three of our distinguished panelists. To support ecosystem and community resilience, can the CEC strategy support member governments to standardize data, information, and other tools for decision making? For example, to study the impacts of climate change to ecosystem services and public health. I'm not sure if That's clear, but this is the way I've received it from Twitter. So as you know, they're limited to 140 characters. So.
Word yes. I mean, we are working. And we're working again among our governments to share data, to share, and as you saw with the Clean Air initiative in Alaska, there was a very important sharing of data in terms of clean air. And I'm glad that the question is asked as an ecosystem question, because it really, in terms of adaptation to climate change, it really does come down to the broader ecosystem rather than addressing simply one issue or another piecemeal as they may materialize in different places. But again, the simple answer is yes, that's an area that has our focus. We do need to accumulate data, we do need to share it, we do need to analyze it more effectively.
And I would only add that I think what we've attempted to do through the CEC is to ensure that the information that we are presenting and collecting is grounded in real world experience. So community bases, being based in the community is extremely important. Being community driven, which is the beauty of the project, then the PICA project being at least initiated here. But then to turn that into one of our other objectives, which is not to miss the economic opportunity in thinking about adaptation as part of either development or redevelopment issues. All of our countries are dealing with the need to create jobs. All of our countries are dealing with the need to continue to think creatively and innovatively about the challenges we face. And I think the question was elegant in that it asked, can you make sure you're standardizing how you look at this so that we're not reinventing the wheel? And I think we, as a council, that's been our whole point, is that the green economy, low carbon economy, community resilience, economic opportunity around those things are all intertwined. And to the extent that we can focus it on meaningful opportunities for communities, we think that there's real promise.
Bueno, finalmente yo creo que hay un ingrediente muy importante para poder unificar la información y tomar decisiones. Yo le llamaría voluntad política. La voluntad política de estar tres secretarios, tres ministros de medio ambiente dispuestos a trabajar, cada quien en su país, pero unificando los criterios para que funcionen en una región del mundo. El segundo es tener la cercanía con este Consejo Consultivo que ha dado maravillosos resultados para tener ese puente con la sociedad. Y el tercero es la cercanía con los expositores y con los, decimos en México, tuiteros, para tener esta franca comunicación de tomar decisiones para mejorar esta región de América del Norte. Quizás este formato no se veía antes en la Comisión de Cooperación Ambiental y ha sido el producto de todos. Entonces, con esa voluntad política, creemos que podemos reconocer lo que no se ha hecho, pero también trabajar y reconocer lo que sí estamos logrando juntos como región y que muchas otras regiones del mundo podrían adoptar este formato de voluntad política de integración para ir solucionando los problemas que tenemos todos como región.
One last question. We probably need to wrap up in a few moments, but this is from the audience, and it's from a representative of the Gulf Restoration Network to Administrator Jackson. And if I understand correctly, I would say that it's speaking to the general question about funding for resilience and sustainable development work in Gulf coastal communities, and specifically asking about the availability of funds and perhaps tied to some of the, and I apologize, I'm not familiar with the mechanism, but the Clean Water Act accumulation of funds or fines perhaps related to the Deepwater Horizon disaster. So,
sure. Just a couple of points of background for those who might not have been following. In the aftermath of the BP well explosion and release of 4 million barrels of oil into the Gulf of Mexico, the president called for something fairly extraordinary. He said that we should work to make the Gulf stronger and cleaner and better than it was before the spill occurred. Every problem in the Gulf did not stem from the spill. The Gulf environment and ecosystem has been challenged for a long time. We heard the mayor speak yesterday about the loss of wetlands that happened over literally decades for several reasons. We know air quality issues are a concern. We know we have issues that stem from water quality as well. So the Gulf is challenged, habitat and blue water issues and science issues. A couple of important things have happened quite recently. I chaired a task force, the Gulf Coast Ecosystem Restoration Task Force the President established. It included several federal agencies, the alphabet soup, as we say, of federal agencies, but it included the 5 Gulf Coast states as well. And we put out a report not quite a year ago, last fall, that outlined the things that we thought needed to be done to restore the Gulf Coast. And we called on funding and financial resources and echoed a call that had come from the President through Secretary Ray Mavis that the fines, the Clean Water Act in the United States, there are fines now due from BP for this spill, and they can range anywhere from $5 billion up to, some say 20 or so billion dollars. And that's in addition to resource restoration, which is also required by federal law. Recently in the United States Congress was passed something called the Restore Act, which dedicates 80% of the fines that BP will be required to pay, and that number is still to be determined, to go back in a formula to the Gulf states and then to a council to do restoration work in the Gulf of Mexico. As you might expect, and the Gulf Restoration Network is one extraordinarily interested group, but there are many groups along the Gulf Coast who've been waiting for this moment. And it is going to be a challenge. I think we're up to it, to first get BP to live up to its obligation to make it right through fair and prompt payment of their obligations under the Clean Water Act, their fine obligations. And that, as with many things, is in court right now, but we still remain hopeful that BP will indeed step up to the plate there. And then to make sure that money is given out through a set of processes that are transparent, where there's accountability, that have some community focus. And one of the platforms in our report was community resilience. We like that word. We're going to have a whole session on it in just a few minutes. I think you've gotten some sense, thanks to the enormous work of the JPAC, again, thank you, of this community's ability to be resilient. But it will be an exercise and somewhat an experiment in governance, and I hope good governance, to ensure that out of all the effort, whether it's the legislation or the task force or the cleanup or the scientists who are working right now to restore the resources of the Gulf, that the healthy community resilience piece, the health of the community writ large, is not forgotten. And there are many community and community activists here today, and some who've been here through it all before this bill, who have very good ideas about how to make these communities stronger. And the health of the wetlands, the health of the water, the safety of the structures that were supposed to protect this region in the case of storms and flooding, for example, are all part of it. So it will be, going forward, we have all the tools in place. The resources are still awaiting BP to step forward, and I remain hopeful that they will. So I think that was hopefully an answer to the question.